everyone. How are you doing? Joe, thanks so much for the invite to be here. And it's been very exciting today to learn more about Tampa. Before I worked at Forest City, I had the privilege and challenge of working in the Economic Development Office in the City of Washington. So I'm going to share a couple examples of some stuff we managed to do in the City of Washington that hopefully are somewhat relevant, and then a couple that we've managed to do on the private side when I worked at Forest City. You see here is a picture of our park that we just opened up in Washington, D.C. I invite everyone to come to. It's on the Anacostia River that is known as the dirty, smelly river in Washington that's been a sort of painful source of division in the city for many years, and now we're managing to retake that waterfront on behalf of all of our citizens in the city. So the first project I wanted to mention is on the private side. This is where I've spent the last 6.5 years or so working, and this is called the Yards. This is an area of Washington that historically has suffered chronic underinvestment in infrastructure, low occupancy of housing, low education outcomes, bad public health, et cetera, et cetera. And our job is to remake it into a compelling neighborhood that is stitched back with the rest of the surrounding neighborhood. Here you can see a little bit of the context. What's fascinating about this is, we control 42 acres of land next to this dirty river, but it's only a mile from the U.S. Capitol, and it's right on public transit. So if we can kind of get it right, building this new neighborhood, there's great assets that we can connect to and leverage. We're starting to see that already with people from other neighborhoods coming back to enjoy what we've been able to build so far. As a brief summary, this is a public-private partnership. I know everyone here is familiar with that term, among the federal government, the City of D.C., and Forest City in the private sector. We have the fun process of working with over 35 different agencies in the city and the federal government, which is is always challenging, but we're able to get it done together. It's the largest project in the city at 5.5 million square feet with a couple thousand units of housing, both for sale and rental, as well as both market rate and affordable. As you can see here, there's a sizable office component as well, and retail. You can get a sense for this image of the role of the Waterfront Park in really anchoring this project. So unlike a typical shopping mall where you have a Macy's or whoever as your anchor, in this case, this public asset, the park, really is the cultural anchor of this new neighborhood we're trying to build. And that has enabled us to, I think, rapidly transform the market perception of this environment, probably more rapidly than we would have been able to do if we just started with a fill-in-the-blank apartment building, office building, et cetera. After we delivered the park, the next thing we delivered was our first apartment building, which you can see here. It kind of looks like an old cigar factory, but it's not exactly. It's an old ordnance facility that the Navy used. This site was basically the Navy's factory as well as dumping ground, with all the challenges you can imagine with that. But you can see here, in just a few short years, it's actually become a pretty cool place to live. And one of the things I'm excited about this building is it's not just that it has affordable housing in it and it's an adaptive reuse of an old asset, but that most importantly the market has responded, that it's leased up very quickly and it's over pro forma, and with humility beating our competitors in that neighborhood. The next building we're doing is currently under construction is an old Boilermaker shop that we're turning into restaurants, retail, and a little bit of office. Same thing with the next building we're doing. What's fascinating about this building, the reason I wanted to include it, is it's a private use right in the middle of a public waterfront park. So we own this building, we're going to own the land under the building, and the city owns land all around the building. And so we're going to manage to work with the city to deliver an environment where we have both private and cultural uses all intermingled right together, hopefully therefore attracting more people for a longer period. Probably the key factor in our park is that it creates a series of eclectic different experiences, so folks can come back time and time again and look for something different as opposed to a one-time visit, if you will. One of the key factors here with our investment in the Yards, which is about a $2 billion private investment, is that we're really standing on the shoulders of a lot of very complementary other investments that both public and private sector has made. There's new infrastructure. I mentioned the roughly century of ignoring the public infrastructure needs in this neighborhood. So we're rebuilding sewers, streets, electricity, you name it. But we've also been able to work with the public sector on some public housing renovation that I'll mention in a moment. as well as federal office tenant base and presence of the Navy. All of that helps to create a sense of stability in the neighborhood that we can build on. We also happen to have a new baseball stadium next to our project, which is helpful principally in that it has sent a signal to private investors that this general area is going to be safe to invest in. I would not say there is a meaningful spillover effect of baseball patrons who want to come and go to a restaurant or shop, because after all, they're only there about 65 days a year. And another example I wanted to mention briefly on the private side is right up the road in DC, another fairly formerly distressed area, but on top of a great public asset, which is a metro stop, public transit. This was the site of an old, nasty mall that was really the result of just a terrible urban renewal process that had mold growing in it. So we went with the city, got together with our partner Vornado, tore down the mall. We reinserted the old street that used to be there before it was closed pursuant to urban renewal, created a public plaza around the metro, and delivered some office and retail. You can see here it's about a 2 million square foot project with some sustainability features of note. Probably what's most exciting about this is the community was not very receptive to this project for many, many years, and when we finally opened up that new grocery store, all of a sudden everyone seemed to love us. Let me shift now briefly to the public sector side. I'm going to ask Joe to just tap me or something when I,
sure, keep
going too long. So when I worked in the mayor's office, we had this great opportunity of an old abandoned convention center, but it was right in the middle of downtown. So the question was, hey, how can we redevelop this convention center, build a new one, get a convention center hotel going, and unlock this land for private investment? Because after all, it's the private investment that we need to drive the city coffers. This project as you see a rendering now, it's about a $700 million project being done by Hines and Archstone, very capable developers. But what was fascinating about this project, I'll mention on the next slide, is there's an adjacent hotel project that never could have happened were it not for public strategic investment for a portion of the total costs. So while this project here is 100% financed by private capital, it could never have occurred had the public sector not had that strategic intervention. And it's about 7,000 jobs between the two projects. The demographics of DC are what enable this project. I want to be careful about trying to suggest that any old strategic public investment can unlock this kind of private investment, because of course the private investment is always a function of the underlying demographics. Here's a hotel that's next to the new convention center that is also a public-private venture. And I think what's interesting about this is the district's contribution, if you will, was just a pledge of some future tax revenues that was the key piece to unlocking not only the private investment in the hotel, but of course that whole Hines Archstone piece, because you needed to put the hotel on the right site for the hotel to manage the various priorities in the city. Probably the most important piece of this hotel is, yes, it's important to have a convention center hotel, but it's more important to unlock the other land to create a living downtown, because that is the more sustainable long-term development strategy for the city. I also wanted to mention, too, what I'll call micro interventions, which is probably the key point that I'd like to make here as I've had a chance to go around Tampa a little bit today. DC, like Tampa, did some of these silver bullet, large-scale catalytic public investments, new convention center, obviously baseball stadium, et cetera. But none of those were going to solve the fundamental issue of, why didn't we have more people living downtown? Downtown wasn't perceived to be safe, wasn't perceived a great place to hang out, didn't have great public spaces, et cetera, et cetera. So the former mayor, Mayor Williams, decided to enable a property tax abatement, which basically reduced the property taxes and therefore increased the return on investment for developers who were willing to build housing. And it was a buy-right program, so it wasn't a series of backroom negotiations where if you're tight with the mayor, you can come in and get more than the other person. And it was competition-based. So there was a fixed amount of money, it was a fixed amount per square foot, and it was about who can get into the ground fastest. And therefore, it sparked, along with obviously other more market-based factors, a bunch of new housing in downtown. Now we've got 8,500 people living downtown, and a lot of other complementary amenities. The other interesting component, almost like a sister program to the housing tax abatement program, is a very tightly targeted retail TIF program, tax increment finance. This was needed to enable a connection. So we had one street that was, principally abandoned and had a few liquor stores and that kind of thing downtown. But on either end of it, there were some great emerging neighborhoods. So the question is, hey, how can we connect these two nodes in a way that has some sustainable life to it? So what we did is we talked to the developers, realized that the economics of these so-called sparkle retailers that really everyone wanted to see downtown, whether you're a citizen, developer, government, just wasn't going to be viable for the developers to pay those build-out costs for. Here we have an example of the fancy new Zara store. It would have been much easier to just do a cell phone store or something that was basically lower cost to build out. So what the city did was said, hey, Mr. Developer, we'll rebate to you a small portion of the sales taxes that will be generated when you put in the new Zara store or H&M and a couple of the others if you agree to get these sparkle tenants and therefore have slightly higher costs to build out their space for them. And I think this strategic investment combined with that housing tax abatement really has enabled a pretty awesome downtown in DC. I don't know if anyone's been to downtown DC in the last couple of years, but it is really a different place. And it's really the micro piece that's probably a little bit more important on the day-to-day experience than the macro. I'll just briefly mention there's been an important role for the redevelopment of public housing in our city as well. We're involved here in a large-scale mixed-income redevelopment. The key piece here, I think, is that you've got housing of different types, townhomes and multifamily, and it's for different income levels. Market, very low income, and some folks in the middle. Importantly here, there has been market acceptance, so people are willing to pay an average of over $700,000 to own a townhome where you could be next to someone else who paid that kind of money, or it could be next to somebody of a slightly lower income. Tampa's got some great things happening with universities and healthcare. I just wanted to show an example of how a city, developer, and university can partner. This happens to be a project we did in Cambridge that has biotech, retail, and most importantly took a chronically distressed neighborhood and generated a lot of new tax revenue for the city. Excuse me. So I guess to wrap up, from my perspective, these are humble reflections since I'm here to learn about Tampa, but you have to start with a base of demographics, otherwise the strategy won't be realistic. The micro piece is important. Others have mentioned the importance of having one entity with whom the private sector can interact. Flexibility to respond to the market. Don't bet the house on one big idea because the idea will always change, the market will change. And the need for quick wins to enable us to have the strength to continue in the face of the inevitable difficult moments that always come. Thanks very much.